The playground was buzzing with children's laughter, but not everyone was welcome. A young black girl, around 8 years old, sat quietly on the swing, her tiny hands gripping the chains as she tried to enjoy her afternoon. But her presence seemed to disturb one particular woman. This woman, a mother at the park with her young son, shot disapproving glances toward the little girl. Her discomfort grew until she decided she'd had enough. Without hesitation, she marched over to the swing set, her tone sharp and unforgiving. "You don't belong here," she snapped, pulling the swing to a halt. The girl looked up, confused and scared, as the woman demanded she leave. Despite the girl's attempts to explain that she was simply playing like everyone else, the mother wouldn't listen. Her words cut deeper, laced with assumptions and prejudice. Before long, the woman's frustration boiled over, and she physically ushered the girl away from the swings, telling her she wasn't wanted there. The little girl, holding back tears, wandered off to the edge of the park, unsure of where to go next. The other parents whispered among themselves, but no one dared intervene. What the woman didn't know was that this wasn't just any child. Moments after she had sent the girl away, a tall, commanding man in a tailored suit appeared at the edge of the park. His stride was purposeful, his expression unreadable as his eyes scanned the area. The whispers grew louder as some parents began to recognize him. The woman, oblivious to what was happening, continued to play with her son, unaware that her actions were about to catch up with her in ways she could never imagine. The man locked eyes on the woman and began walking toward her, and that's when everything changed. As the man approached, the tension in the air became almost palpable. His presence alone seemed to command attention, and though the woman still hadn't noticed him, others were already pulling out their phones, whispering in hushed tones. The little girl, standing near the park gate, spotted him first. Her eyes lit up with a mix of relief and recognition, but she remained quiet, unsure of what was about to unfold. The man's expression didn't falter, but his gaze was unwavering, locked on the woman who had just humiliated the little girl. The woman, still oblivious, laughed softly as her son played, completely unaware of the storm heading her way. Finally, he stopped just a few feet away, his voice calm but firm. "Excuse me," he said, his tone laced with authority. The woman turned, startled, her expression quickly shifting to confusion as she took in his sharp appearance. His tailored suit and polished demeanor were not what she expected to see at a playground. "Can I help you?" she asked, a defensive edge creeping into her voice. The man glanced toward the little girl, then back at the woman. "Yes," he replied evenly. "I'd like to know why you felt it was acceptable to treat my daughter the way you did." The color drained from her face as the weight of his words hit her. She stammered, looking from him to the girl, trying to make sense of the situation. "Your daughter," she repeated, disbelief dripping from her voice. Her mind raced, realizing too late that she had made a grave mistake. Meanwhile, the crowd around them grew, curiosity drawing more parents closer. Whispers of recognition spread as someone murmured his name, and the woman's eyes widened in panic. She had no idea who she had just offended, but she was about to find out. The man stood tall, his presence commanding the attention of everyone in the park. The little girl, sensing his reassurance, walked over to him, clutching the hem of his jacket with a trust that spoke volumes. The woman's eyes darted from the girl to the man, and then to the growing crowd. Her son tugged at her hand, but she barely noticed, her mind racing as the weight of her actions began to settle in. "Are you implying she's your daughter?" she asked, her voice faltering as she gestured toward the little girl. Her words, though meant to feign innocence, carried an undertone of disbelief that only added to the tension. The man's gaze didn't waver. "Yes, she is," he said, his voice calm yet firm. "And I'd like to know why you thought it was appropriate to treat her with such cruelty." The crowd murmured, and someone nearby whispered the man's name again, this time louder. "That's Kim," a woman said, her voice filled with awe. "He's the CEO of that global firm, the one with all those humanitarian initiatives." The realization spread like wildfire, and the woman's face paled further as pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. She had not only wronged a child, but had unknowingly humiliated the daughter of a man with significant power and influence. At the same time, the little girl's perspective came into focus. She clung to her father, but cast a wary glance toward the boy who had laughed at her earlier. Her feelings were a mix of fear and defiance, a reflection of the resilience she'd learned from her dad. The boy, now sensing the gravity of the situation, stood awkwardly beside his mother, his earlier confidence replaced with confusion and guilt. The tension in the air grew thicker as another layer of complexity emerged. A nearby parent stepped forward, sharing that they had witnessed the incident and had recorded everything. The woman's lips parted as she started to protest, but the evidence was undeniable. Yet, instead of outrage, the man remained poised. His calm exterior masked the storm brewing within, as he contemplated not just what had happened, but how to ensure such treatment would never happen again, not just for his daughter, but for anyone who looked like her. As the crowd waited to see what he would do next, the woman's earlier arrogance was replaced by visible panic. Yet beneath the surface, questions lingered. What had driven her actions in the first place? And what consequences would this moment bring for everyone involved? The park seemed to hold its breath, every eye fixed on the man, the woman, and the little girl caught in the middle of a conflict that was far from over. The man knelt down, meeting his daughter's gaze. He gently wiped away her tears and spoke softly, "You don't have to be afraid. I'm here." His voice was calm, but his eyes carried a fierce determination. The little girl nodded, her small hand clutching his tightly. Meanwhile, the murmurs in the crowd grew louder. People were beginning to recognize him fully now, not just as a prominent figure, but as someone who had dedicated his life to fighting for justice and equality. The woman, still frozen in shock, seemed to shrink under the weight of the crowd's judgment. The man stood up and turned his attention back to the woman. "Do you understand what you've done?" he asked, his voice low but laced with intensity. She stammered, her words barely audible. I didn't know. I didn't mean." But her excuses fell flat, the crowd already seeing through them. The tension was palpable, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone watching. The boy clung to his mother's side, his earlier smugness replaced with unease as he watched the confrontation unfold. Then, a voice from the crowd broke the silence. "Why did you do it?" someone asked. The question hung in the air, demanding an answer. The woman looked around, her face flushed with embarrassment. "I didn't know she was his daughter," she blurted out, as if that justified her actions. The crowd gasped, and a ripple of anger spread among the onlookers. It wasn't about who the girl's father was, it was about the way she had been treated. The man's jaw tightened. It shouldn't matter whose daughter she is. She's a child, a human being, and she deserves respect. But instead, you chose cruelty. His words were sharp and unwavering, cutting through the woman's feeble attempts to explain. The crowd edged closer, their curiosity and outrage mingling in equal measure. Just as the tension seemed like it couldn't grow any higher, a uniformed officer entered the scene, drawn by the commotion. The woman's face lit up with relief, assuming she was about to be rescued from the situation. But the officer approached the man instead, his expression respectful. "Sir, is everything all right here?" he asked, recognizing him instantly. The woman's confidence crumbled as she realized the officer wasn't there to support her, but to address the man she had wronged. The tables had turned completely, and the crowd sensed that the climax was near. Everyone watched in breathless anticipation, waiting to see how this confrontation would finally play out. The tension crackled in the air, leaving no doubt that the moment of truth was about to unfold. The officer glanced between the man and the woman, his face grim as he assessed the situation. The woman, still clinging to the hope of an ally, spoke up shakily. "Officer, thank goodness you're here. This man, he's causing a scene. I was just trying to keep the playground safe." Her voice wavered, and the excuse sounded weaker the more she spoke. The officer raised an eyebrow, his focus shifting fully to the man, who remained calm but resolute. "Ma'am," the officer said, his tone firm, I think you should step aside for a moment. I need to confirm something." He pulled out his radio, speaking in low, measured tones. The woman's relief faltered, replaced by confusion. "Confirm what?" she asked nervously, her eyes darting between the officer and the man she had wronged. But her question hung unanswered as the officer nodded into his radio and turned back toward the man. "You're not just anyone, are you, sir?" the officer asked. The man gave a faint nod, his gaze steady. "No," he replied, "I'm not." The crowd, already murmuring among themselves, fell into an uneasy silence as the weight of the moment settled over them. The officer stepped closer, lowering his voice, but still loud enough for those nearby to hear. "We've just confirmed your identity. I didn't realize. I didn't expect." He trailed off, visibly unsettled. The woman, sensing that something significant was about to be revealed, pressed further. "What is it? Who is he?" she demanded, her voice a mix of curiosity and rising panic. The officer hesitated, but before he could respond, the man's phone buzzed in his pocket. He checked it briefly and then locked eyes with the officer. "You'll want to hear this," he said, holding the phone toward the officer. A voice on the other end, authoritative and familiar, echoed through the small speaker. "We've been monitoring this situation. Ensure Mr. Carter and his daughter are treated with the utmost respect. Any failure to do so will have serious consequences." The name hit like a shockwave. Mr. Carter. The man wasn't just a prominent figure. He was the CEO of one of the largest philanthropic organizations in the country, a man known for his relentless fight against injustice. The crowd collectively inhaled as the revelation sank in. The woman's face turned pale, her earlier smugness replaced by visible fear. She took a step back, her confidence crumbling further. But the man, still holding his daughter's hand, stood rooted, his expression unreadable. The officer stiffened, clearly aware of the gravity of the situation. Before anyone could process the full weight of the revelation, the man's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text message, a photo. His expression shifted, a flicker of something darker passing across his face. He turned the phone toward the woman. "This isn't the first time, is it?" he asked, his voice low but piercing. The woman's eyes widened as she stared at the image on the screen. It was undeniable proof of a pattern, something far worse than anyone had suspected. The stakes had just escalated, and the crowd held their breath, knowing the confrontation was far from over. The woman's face turned ashen as she stared at the photo on Mr. Carter's phone. It was an image of her at a prior community event, speaking angrily to another black family. The timestamp was clear, the location unmistakable. It wasn't just a moment of prejudice, it was a pattern, a habit that had gone unnoticed until now. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder, a mix of disbelief and judgment. People began to step back, distancing themselves from her, as if her actions carried a weight they no longer wanted to be associated with. Mr. Carter's voice broke through the tense silence, calm but cutting. "This isn't about me or my daughter anymore. This is about a community that needs to do better. My daughter deserves a safe place to play, just like every other child here." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. The woman's lips trembled, her attempts at justification dying on her tongue. There was nothing left to defend. The officer stepped forward, his stance formal, but with an air of discomfort. "Ma'am, I need to ask you to leave the premises," he said, his tone firm. "You've caused enough harm today." The woman's eyes darted to the crowd, seeking an ally, but all she found were cold, disapproving stares. Defeated, she grabbed her son's hand and walked away quickly, her head low. As she disappeared from view, the crowd's attention returned to Mr. Carter. His daughter clung to his hand, her tears drying as he knelt to her level. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" he asked softly. She nodded, her voice small but steady. "I'm okay, Daddy." The tenderness of the moment melted the tension that had gripped the playground. Just as the atmosphere began to ease, Mr. Carter stood and addressed the crowd. "We can't allow hate to have a place here, or anywhere," he said. Today was a wake-up call, but it doesn't have to end here. Let's do better for our children and for each other." The crowd erupted into applause, a shared acknowledgement of the lesson they had all witnessed. But just as the applause started to fade, Mr. Carter's phone buzzed again. He glanced at it briefly, his brow furrowing. Without explaining, he turned to the officer. "There's one more thing we need to talk about," he said, his tone serious. The officer's face mirrored his concern, and they stepped aside for a hushed conversation. As the crowd began to disperse, a few parents approached Mr. Carter, thanking him and offering their support. His daughter returned to the swing, a smile slowly creeping back onto her face. Yet, as Mr. Carter glanced toward the horizon, a shadow of unease lingered. The resolution had been public, but something deeper was still unfolding, something only he and the officer now understood. The playground was calm again, but the story wasn't quite over. As the sun began to set, Mr. Carter walked back to his daughter, his conversation with the officer concluded. The tension in his face had softened, replaced by a quiet determination. He scooped his little girl into his arms, her laughter breaking through the lingering unease. For her, the moment had passed, but for Mr. Carter, it was a reminder of the work still to be done. The other parents lingered for a moment longer, some offering nods of respect or small words of encouragement. A woman who had been watching from a distance approached cautiously. "I'm so sorry for what happened today," she said. "If there's anything we can do as a community, please let us know." Mr. Carter smiled faintly, appreciating the gesture. "It starts with understanding," he replied, "and with standing up when we see something wrong." The playground felt different now, quieter but somehow more united. The woman and her son had left, and while the incident would not soon be forgotten, it had sparked conversations that couldn't be ignored. Parents exchanged glances, a silent agreement forming between them. They would talk to their children, to each other. They would be better. As Mr. Carter carried his daughter toward the car, she rested her head on his shoulder. "Daddy," she said softly, "are people always going to be mean like that?" He paused, his heart heavy with the weight of her question. "Not always, sweetheart," he said gently. "And when they are, we'll always stand up for what's right. That's how we make things better." The drive home was quiet, the sky painted in hues of orange and purple. Mr. Carter glanced in the rearview mirror, watching his daughter drift off to sleep. He couldn't change the world in one day, but he could teach her resilience, kindness, and strength. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to start.